Hello and welcome to everybody who's on the webinar. I appreciate you being here with us today. My apologies for the announcements telling you a time that actually was never scheduled. So I apologize for those things and appreciate the fact that you're here with us now. We have a lot of people signed up for this thing and they keep joining up. So I'm stalling for a few seconds here so that we don't get into the meat of the material before we have most of the people that want that information. So what I'm going to tell you up front is that I'm going to provide you with a lot of information. We're going to give you a lot of stuff over the course of the next hour. And a lot of this is information as far as your business is concerned, what you can do today, right now, and what you can do and expect over the next few weeks and next few months as we get through this period of time. I realize it's a difficult time. I realize there's a lot of voices in your head right now, a lot of people that are telling you a lot of different things. So hopefully this will add to some of the decision-making processes that each of you need to go through as you navigate this time, and what of the realistic things you can do are that will make a difference, not only now, but in the long run, as I realize the difficulty that each of you are trying to navigate through. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Travis. I've been coaching in this industry for almost 2 decades now, and that's a long time. So been through a few things like this before, and been coaching outside of this industry for 3 decades. So there's a lot of experience that's coming in on my end as a coach. And our guest today, Troy, and you'll meet him in just a little bit, and I'll let him speak to himself, speak to his qualifications as well, but comes from a long line of dentists inside of his family. So he's very well versed because they all just use him unabashedly. So he's got a lot of experience in that area, and as an experienced business attorney, really knows how to navigate these things, and has been involved in the preparation of the bills that he'll discuss as well. And so there's a lot of information that he has to be able to give you, and so we're going to bounce off of one another. That's going to be the format. I'm gonna bounce questions off of him, as well as give you, he's going to provide you with some very clear information. And then together, our goal will be to provide you with the best information that we know today. And please realize that this is a fluid process. Things change rapidly because it's all brand new. So we'll give you the best information that we have today, but realize that that may not be the same information next week that would apply. And if there's things that we need to update you on, we'll do so then as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get into the information. So I'm going to share my screen. So if you give me just a second here, it's going to look a little bit strange for just a moment. And I'll start the presentation on my end. And that should be the main thrust of what you have available to you now is seeing that and far less of me. So let's go ahead and start. Basically, this is the format that we're going to talk about, what to do with your employees, your patients, and what to do with the business as a whole. When concerning your employees, there are a variety of different things to consider. Some of those we're going to talk about directly as far as things that are affected, things from your employees or from your team's standpoint, what can be done there. And some of these are more generally applicable things that I just want you to be able to think about as you consider your team and the disposition of those folks as you move forward through this process. What to do with patients, I'll make that one very simple for you right now. You don't want to have long bouts of silence. So the best I can tell you is communicate with them. Be highly communicative with them. Now, you're not going to overload them, and certainly I'm not suggesting that you send them information on COVID-19. They're getting a ton of that, and they're looking for a ton of that, but you don't need to add to that pool. What you do want to communicate are things that will continue to enhance the relationship that you already have with those folks, as well as let them know how you're there to serve them. What are you doing to be able to serve them, and how you can serve them? Be very clear, be very transparent in that communication, and give them a clear means to be able to communicate with you effectively. And just let them know generally you're there to serve them. So that's what I would do in regard to patients. Now, the rest of this is going to be, okay, what do we do with the business? So as you consider what to do with the business, I'm going to turn the time now over to Troy Keller and let him begin to help you navigate what to do with the business. Troy?
Hey, Travis. Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. In fact, I kept having to dart off the screen to tell my kids to keep it down in the background. It's strange times, right? I've always, for years, I've been saying I wish I could spend more time, working from home or hanging out at home, and now that dream has been fulfilled. But boy, it's more than I expected. And thanks for the comment on, I've lost count of how many dentists are in my family, or have, my father's a dentist. I've got 3 brothers who are dentists. A brother-in-law is a dentist, and our family reunions are, they are painful. For many years, all we talked about was the practice of dentistry. But then over time, we decided that we realized that we could work together, and they would start, as they had their questions, they would turn them into business questions, legal questions, and there I could help out. And there we've had a lot of fun over the years talking about how to make their practices effective, and how to expand them, and stay out of trouble on the legal front. So my background is I'm what's called a business lawyer, a corporate lawyer. The things that are my specialty involve transactions like financings, or in your cases, if you're selling your practice, or maybe buying another practice, or putting together a partnership arrangement with a group of dentists. That's the kind of stuff where we're experts in and really can add a lot of value. But also on general business questions, we field those and try to help out, and that's kind of the situation here today. So while I'm not an expert on employment law, not an expert on the SBA, not an expert on tax, I've dealt with enough situations that I think we can have a pretty interesting discussion today and get through some of this, and hopefully add some value. And if there's things we can't figure out, I can always go ask some of my partners who are experts, and shoot a note back to Travis, and he can get that information out to you.
Beautiful. And again, Troy, thank you very much for being with us. And just for background, whether you're a dentist or an orthodontist, your business situations are very similar. And so I'll be giving references to both, and realize from a business standpoint, they're going to apply. And I'm going to also give references to small practices, single doctor practices, as well as larger practices, even the DSO models. So let's jump right in then to the information. And Troy, if you want to just provide an overview here of what's been done so far, and then we'll get into the details.
Yeah, we won't spend much time on this. This is just really for context. Congress, to its credit, has acted very quickly and done 3 major pieces of legislation in response to the crisis. And as Travis mentioned, on our sort of advocacy front, we and I personally have been involved in getting some messages to Congress, and getting some of these things that we'll talk about really in place. So the first 2 phases really aren't, phase 2, the FFCRA does have some impacts, and I think that's more on the employment side. If people have questions, we can certainly address some of those. But really what we want to talk about today is phase 3, which is this $2.2 trillion stimulus package, and it helps big businesses, it helps small businesses, it helps individuals. It really covers a lot of territory. And that's the part that we'll mostly focus on today.
Okay.
And within that CARES Act, that 3rd stimulus bill, there probably a good 1/3 of it in terms of real estate on the legislative side, and maybe a 1/4 of it in terms of actual dollar spend is for small businesses. There have been a couple of programs. One is the Small Business Administration Disaster Relief Program, and we will refer to that a few times in this discussion because while you can do both, there are limitations to doing both, and we'll cover some of that as we get into this. I will mostly spend most of our time on is the Paycheck Protection Program, just because it is with the ability to have loans forgiven, it is just so valuable. So that's sort of an overview of the specific things we'll talk about today. So I'll just start talking for a minute, but Travis, feel free to jump in and start asking questions at any moment that you think. But basically on the application side, the key piece of advice I would give is start today. On April 3rd, so this Friday, we have heard informally, and actually I think I've seen it in the press a little bit over the last 24 hours as well. So I think it's real. As of April 3rd, this Friday, the SBA will start to give out application numbers. So what that means is that if you have got your application filled out and ready and worked on with your bank or directly with the SBA, that's the day when you can be in the queue and hopefully get a number assigned to your application, and that will start the formal process. It's unclear how long it's going to take for these applications to be reviewed and approved, but we know at least the starting date, which we didn't know really until earlier this week. We put a couple links on here that just talk about where you can find banks. Start with your local bank. But if there are others, but if you don't get a good response there, then try another bank. I think some are a little more up to speed than others.
And Troy, in one of the conversations that we had earlier, you had indicated that sometimes perhaps the bankers aren't fully up to speed yet. That this information, because this is so new, they might be an SBA lender, or they could not be an SBA lender, or previously would not have been an SBA lender, but they can still administer these types of loans. And so not everybody is quite up to speed. So it does behoove our doctors here to kind of be up to speed on their own.
Yes, and so there's a lot of material out there that you can look at to learn what the program really is and what the terms of it are. You're going to be working with bankers who maybe in the past your banker will say, "Oh yeah, I've done 10,000 of these. This is how it always is." You're not going to talk to anyone who's able to say that because no one's done any of these yet. So you can read the rules as well as they can, and you can push back. In fact, the summaries that we're using today came. I pulled with permission pulled these from the Senate Committee on Small Business and put together a nice summary. And while we have our own, it was a little more detailed than it was probably fit for purpose today. So there is a ton of information out there, and encourage you to get educated on it. One other point on that, and Travis's good point, another sub point to that is that because it's such a new program, there are going to be a lot of circumstance, a lot of situations that will be cases of first impression. And so again, getting in early will give you the chance to, maybe you're the first time that your banker or the SBA even has looked at the specific question or issue that you have. So if you can get in early, maybe you're able to push that forward in a way that's advantageous to you, as opposed to, a few weeks from now and maybe it's gone the other way. And
one other point that I think is important to mention here is that because of the current national situation, the application process has been streamlined, the qualification process has been streamlined. So many of you, in fact, probably every one of you, is aware of the normal rigors of the loan process. This is a different animal.
Yeah, well said. And the Treasury, Secretary Mnuchin has said over and over, this is going to happen fast, and they're going to, do their best to make it happen fast. So just by way of example, the SBA was criticized earlier this week because even on the disaster relief loan application, they're getting so many of those, their site kept crashing. And so they claim that on Friday, they will have, Amazon Web Services backing them up. They've got a contract in place so that their site, hopefully, according to them, won't fail this time around. So the government is taking this very seriously, and hopefully we see a different face than we sometimes see.
And by the way, if you do see that, just as an FYI, if you do see that failure aspect, their peak times are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So if you go 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., you're far more likely to be able to get through on the site.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice.
Okay, let's jump to the next bullet.
Yeah. So a lot of people have asked the question, is this, what if I'm like a sole proprietor? I mean, I don't have a corporation or an LLC. What if I'm an independent contractor? What if I work for Uber? I know, does this still apply to me? And the answer is yes. It's meant to be very broad. The goal of it is to keep people employed. So if you have a payroll, even if you're the main person on that payroll, this is applicable to you.
And that, doctors, is the big point. You can, as long as you have established payroll and you have a payroll history, you can make sure you continue to get compensated at the level that you were compensated before within the limits that are available that Troy will discuss in a while. But there's a couple other implications here, Troy. What about our doctors who hire 1099 contract doctors? In that situation, what advice would you have?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So your payroll, you're definitely able to include expenses of contractors, and so that works there. But if they're more of a vendor, meaning that they work, I know in some cases you'll have dentists that maybe work at 3 or 4 practices. Well, then maybe you won't really be able to claim them as part of your payroll. So that's a situation where you'll need to fill out the application, fill it out honestly, provide your payroll expenses, and submit that, and you might get some review. You might have to talk through it, but that's one of those situations where I think we'll know more as we work through the process. If on the other hand so for example, if that dentist is working as a contractor, basically has their own business, again, as we just talked about, there's nothing to keep them from also seeking a loan, but both won't be able to get forgiveness of that. I think it might work itself out if I understand how these situations. And Travis kind of reminded me a little bit earlier on how oftentimes when dentists are working on a contract basis, they tend to get paid based on the amount of revenue they produce. And so if you've got someone like that on your payroll, but they are not, but you're not using them because there isn't work being done, then you won't satisfy the requirement later on for forgiveness, because you wouldn't have kept your payroll up to within 75% of what it normally is. So I think some of that will work itself out, but that's a great question. One of those that will have a lot of, I think there'll be some sorting out to do as part of the process. But our advice is go ahead and claim them. Be clear with who they are and how you use them in your application, and then work that through with the SBA.
Super. On the application process itself, for those of you who haven't yet applied, it's going to ask you for your average monthly payroll. And your average monthly payroll, you need to be precise with that. So make sure you get those accurate numbers, and then you simply are going to multiply that by 2.5 times. That's what the Payback Protection Program calculation is for this particular loan. And so if you're going to include your 1099 folks in there, that's where it gets sticky. And that's what Troy's talking about, is that you can go back into February and say, this is what we paid that 1099 person in February. But your maintenance of that is going to be a little bit tricky. So just be aware. And I think his advice there is what I want to echo. Work together. Don't go off and do something on your own without working with that 1099 contractor to see what they're doing, so that it doesn't catch one or the other of you down the road.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Okay, and that's what, I'm sorry, I just talked about here, but let's talk about that 8-week period of time, Troy.
Yeah, so the point is to, the goal of this is to cover 8 weeks of payroll expenses and certain additional expenses. So that so you once you've sort of figured out your average monthly payroll and calculate the size of your loan, then you get into this period where your forgiveness of that loan will tie to whether you spend in an 8-week period an amount that equals the loan amount on sort of eligible expenses. I think actually the next slide probably gets into a little bit more on those, on which of those are eligible or not. So yeah, so if you look at that top Q&A there, the amount that can be forgiven is equal to the sum of expenses for payroll, existing payments on mortgages, rent payments, leases, utility service. So those are the kind of things that if you spend, you can show that you've spent an amount equal to your loan on those things during the 8 months, during the 8 weeks, then you'll be able to get loan forgiveness, subject to one other condition that we'll talk about in a minute. But that's sort of the did I use these proceeds in the right way test, and those are the things you can use them on. You can't use them. You can't buy a bunch of inventory and stock that up. It doesn't work for that. But for other expenses like the ones described here, that's what the test will look at, and it'll look at it over an 8-week period.
Okay, so let's talk about that for just a moment and dive a little bit deeper into that. So you say rent payment and leases. So I'm assuming if I have a practice that's in a leased building, so I'm in a strip mall or something like that, and I'm leasing that, I can include 100% amount of that lease payment, or I can apply 100% amount of that lease payment to this payroll protection, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What if, however, that lease exceeds the 2.5 time equation that I have available to me?
Well, for one, you're good then. You've already satisfied that piece of the test. Your loan can be forgiven based on your lease expense alone. Yeah, I think so. In that sense, it's fine. I think what you're hinting at though is, the loan isn't going to be enough to keep you operating clearly in that sort of a situation. So you might need additional support, maybe through the disaster, loan fund or something else. But the good, that does, but nonetheless, even though it's a huge lease amount, it does qualify as expenses that can help you meet the test to show that you spent the full amount during that 8-week period.
Okay, so let's talk about leases then in a different context. Many of our doctors lease equipment. Do you see that as being within that category as well?
Yeah, okay, great question. So there are two types of leases. There are operating leases and capital leases. So while this isn't, again, there's nothing in the legislation that draws a distinction. This is basically all it says. It's normally, in my experience, what they would look at would be what are called operating leases, like what you would pay to rent equipment versus, a capital lease where you're basically buying the equipment and financing it over time through a lease arrangement. Does that make sense, Trevor, the distinction? I suspect that's where the line will be drawn.
Okay, so again, just to the doctors, just know the situation. And I think the best advice that we can give here is to be transparent. Yeah. You're not trying to do anything that's against the law. You simply are trying to keep your business open. And that for the doctors, that's really what this is all about. This is a cash flow situation. And you run a cash flow business. There's no doubt about that. So you just have to look at it from that perspective and not try to do anything that would be questionable down the road. Another element of this, Troy, another caveat here is that a lot of doctors, on the advice of their accountants, they do have a set salary, and they're taking that salary. And then they also have a distribution that comes on top of that. Would you talk about that for just a moment?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, nothing in this will restrict you from continuing to take that approach. The $100,000 limit just means, it doesn't mean you can't pay yourself more than $100,000, but it means that you can't, when you're calculating that 2.5 times to get to your loan amount, you can't include anything above 100,000. So let's say that a dentist is making 150,000, and then the rest of the staff are making, somewhere, between 50 and 100,000. Well, you get to count all the salary of those staff, but for the dentist, you only get to count up to the 100,000 when you're calculating how much of a loan you can take out, and also when you're calculating whether you've met whether you've spent the money in an appropriate way. You can only account for, the pro rata portion of 100,000, not the 150. Did that answer that question, Travis?
Yeah, I think we just want to understand that. Well, you know what? Let's go a little deeper on the 100,000. So the 100,000 is a per annum number, yeah. Not 100,000 within that 8-week period of time.
Right.
It's 100,000 over. And what we don't know right now is how is this all going to be justified. And we talked earlier about, is this a good time to give yourself a raise?
Well, I think that, so going back to something you said a minute ago, which I thought was very astute, which is, yeah, the SBA will be looking out for fraud, right? That's something, is a general matter that they care deeply about. And fraud is when you hide things. So if you're fully transparent on the steps that you've taken, when you report that 8-week period, how much you spent during that 8-week period, if you provide detail and itemize what you did, no one can accuse you of fraud. It's when you hide things or try to, cook the books that you'll get into trouble. So I think if in the ordinary course, you normally give a raise during that 8-week period and you give it, I think it'll probably be okay, but it could be that they won't count that raise as part of your, as towards your commitment to spend that loan effectively during an 8-week period on your operations to keep your business going. So I think, again, nothing keeps you from doing that, but just be fully transparent and you'll stay out of trouble.
Okay. And then the last question on that particular issue would be if a lot of our practices will normally pay a bonus. They will bonus their team members. And again, I'm thinking that's a justification issue. As long as you can justify it from prior practice, then you're okay to continue that practice.
Yes, they will look at consistency between the expenses that you're using to justify the loan forgiveness and that average salary, that average monthly payroll that you showed at the beginning to calculate the size of your loan. So if you're doing things one way, if you're calculating your payroll, one way for the average and a different way for to show the expenses, then that's where it's not going to work out. And so if you basically have a monthly bonus that you always pay depending on collections or profitability in that month, then that will in all likelihood have been incorporated into your payroll, the average monthly that you use to get your loan, and so it would be appropriate to also include it then in the spending phase to show that you've spent what you're required to spend. So I think that's what I'd say to that. That if it's it's factored in both sides, you're going to be okay. But you can't only factor it in one side and not the other.
Okay. And then I just thought of another element. So I told you I was going to throw you some curveballs.
No, this is great. I love it.
So again, from a practical aspect, in dentistry or in orthodontics, there are peaks and valleys throughout a 12-month period of time of what is peak production. And so in some months production rises, in some months production is lower, but it generally seems to be fairly consistent. And so when we're talking about the justification of the salary being paid, because often these are hourly workers, let's say in orthodontics, for example, we know that June, July, and August are much higher demand months. So people are generally paid more because they're working more hours than they would, let's say, in February. And so when I'm calculating my payroll, especially when it's an hourly basis and it does fluctuate, what's the recommendation that I take that calculation from that's going to be justifiable, or do we just not know yet?
Well, it might be in the application, a form of which is now up. And I glanced at that earlier today. It just came out yesterday.
It
But
is not.
it's not in there. Oh, okay.
Nope.
Well, you're supposed to provide your average monthly. Normally, an average monthly is taken over a 12-month period. So that's what I would expect it to be. And so that, in theory, that adjusts for the seasonality that you've described. If you're a new practice, I think, then you've got, it allows you to go back to the beginning of this year. But otherwise, I think the implication is that you would have kind of an average over a 12-year. And I only say that because that is so common, and that's the normal approach taken in, to adjust for seasonality, like I described.
Okay, and I'm mistaken, Troy. I'm reading it, reading it right now,
Good.
and it does say on this that the average is the average monthly payroll for 2019, excluding costs over 100,000. For seasonal or new businesses, just use January to February.
Yeah.
15.
Yeah. Okay. There we go.
So that's where that sits. Okay. If you've already laid off employees, talk about this last sentence in that first bullet.
Yeah. Sure. So, yeah, you've already laid off. So I mentioned earlier there were two conditions to getting the loan forgiveness of that 2.5 times loan. So to get the forgiveness, the first condition was that you spent within that 8 weeks what you were supposed to spend. We talked through that in detail. The second condition is that you keep basically 75% of your payroll in place, but you can still be forgiven even if you've laid off people if you rehire those employees by the end of June 2020. So it gives you some time to sort of bring in and the logic is there if you think about it. Once we get through this crisis, everyone's assuming, well, I think a week or so they were assuming. Now who knows? But the hope and goal is that the core part of this crisis is done, by the end of May into June, and that by the end of June you'd be in a position to rehire people. So it does give you that time frame and flexibility.
Okay, and we are going to go into some detail in a while here on what that process would look like, and the implications of what the future may look like in regard to hiring, rehiring, kind of when and how to look at some of those factors. Because there are some hard realities here that we're going to have to face and we're going to have to look at. So if you've already laid them off, the idea is to bring them back. However, the caveat in this is if you're saying on your loan application that this is your amount of salary and you don't get to that level in that 8-week period of time that you're going to use as your time frame, then it will appear, or at least the data will substantiate that you didn't use the loan as it was intended, which may then say that some of this that you didn't use for those purposes could be assessed the appropriate amount of interest on that loan. So you not only don't get it forgiven, but then you would have the interest payment on top of that.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So you have until that June 30th. We talked about this earlier, and the timing of that is important. Troy, why is that timing important?
Well, I mean, it's funny, the 8-week period is sort of tested, before that. So if you, so there's that element, but I think more importantly, if you wait until June 30th, even though in theory you could make your application all the way up until the end of June, remember there's a finite bucket of dollars that Congress has appropriated for this program. And this program by far has received the most attention publicly in the press, has been touted by Treasury a lot. I think that, I mean, I really, I don't know, I'm not an economist, but I think there's a significant, risk that that money is gone long before June 30th. So, so get your applications in, fast and, fast and furious.
Okay, so let's talk about the realities of the EIDL versus the PPP and what the intricacies of each of those are.
Yeah, so this is like a little complex, but hopefully we can keep it simple. But basically, the PPP has a $10 million sort of cap on it. So you might think, oh wow, that's plenty. That's a lot bigger than the $2 million that I can get under an EIDL. But remember, that 10 million is really pointed at companies that have huge payroll expenses. What you can borrow under the PPP is the lesser of 10 million or 2.5 times your monthly payroll. So in most cases, that's going to be a lot less than that. In fact, for most dental and orthodontic practices, 2.5 times your payroll is going to be a lot less than 2 million. So if you're in that category, let's say your payroll is 100,000 for a month, so maybe you can get a loan that's a few $100,000. Well, if you go the EIDL route, you can get up to 2 million. So what you can do is you can get both, but only the PPP portion can be forgiven, and then you'll still owe the rest of you'll still owe on the EIDL, and so so you can do both, but only the PPP part is forgiven. And I think there's a reduction in the EIDL for the amount of, so let's say, I just gonna try to keep it simple, but I'm failing. Let's say you do both, you get the PPP forgiven, you then have to take that money that was forgiven, and you have to basically pay down the EIDL to reduce it. So let's say you had a full $2 million EIDL and you also had $1 million PPP. Well, at the end of this, you'll get forgiveness on the PPP, but your EIDL will have been reduced to $1 million. So if you do want, some people are looking at it and saying, look, I think the forgiveness is great, but I need the larger amount for the longer period of time. I don't think many people, but some, I think, have taken that analysis and said, I'll just go the EIDL route. But like I said, I think for most people, that forgiveness is just so great, and there are other places you can go to get more financing. So I would recommend that if you need more than you can get under the PPP, do both, and just know that the PPP will offset the size of your EIDL loan.
So from a practical matter, Troy, and this kind of goes outside of the legal bounds, not being illegal, but outside of just the pure legal bounds.
Yeah, my expertise, yeah.
Let's say, for instance, that a doctor has, has incurred in their practice, they have $250,000 left on their loans, getting their practice set up, and they're paying 5% interest on that $250,000. And so here perhaps is an opportunity where in their practice, they wouldn't qualify for the PPP up to that level, but under the EIDL, they may be able to get enough to not only cover their operating expenses, but to also pay off that existing loan that's at a higher interest rate than what's guaranteed today under EIDL. Is that an appropriate use?
I don't see why not. Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't do that. The only consideration I give is that, and it may not matter, but I know that a lot of dentists are trying to get to the point where they're not personally guaranteeing loans on their, that relate to their business. They want to sort of get to the point where they can separate their personal liability and their business liability. The EIDL there are no personal guarantees up to 200,000. So that's a number that a lot of people are looking at and saying, I'm just going to take 200,000 because I don't have to personally guarantee it. But above that, you do. Great information
right there. All right. That was worth the price you paid to be here already, folks.
Excellent.
So let's move on a little bit.
We kind of covered most of this already. I think this is, some practical advice on where to go to get the loans. Obviously, the SBA and what we call 7A lenders. Those are lenders that have been SBA licensed in the past, and that's on the disaster relief program. The Paycheck Protection, you can literally go to anyone. However, because the SBA knows they're going to need a lot of help to get all these processed. However, what I would recommend is that, if possible, you kind of try to find out if your bank is on the SBA's quote express loan platform, and they might not know what you're talking about, the local branch. I don't really know how to help you beyond that, but I just have heard from the Bankers Association that the SBA will be able to turn those around faster. So if your bank is on the express loan platform, I imagine the larger banks are, then your application will be turned around faster. So that's a piece of practical advice that's only goes so far, but I think it could be useful.
So just one more thing on here that I see right now, under the PPP program, number 3, not only FDIC, but also the credit unions would fall into that as well, correct?
Any state or federal licensed bank. So if you're in, Iowa and it's State Bank of Iowa, it's only in Iowa, normally wouldn't be an SBA lender. In this case, it is. Any state or licensed bank can help you process these.
All right, super. All right, let's talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, and here's where my expertise is going to really drop off. I'm not an employment person, but basically, under FFCRA, and that's that second category that I mentioned way on earlier, the second relief. That one was not pointed at businesses, it was pointed more at employees. And the idea was that if employees got into a tough situation, either they had the virus or family members had the virus, or they needed to stay at home because their school was closed and they weren't able to come into work. So long as the employer was required to front to them basically their wages during a percentage of their wages during that time frame. The government then said, since most of this is falling on small businesses, the government said, yeah, but we'll get it back to you. You can just deduct it out of your payroll taxes over a period of time. So it's kind of the company fronting this what's effectively employment sick leave, basically, that the government wants to provide. But then the company's able to get it back over time. So it wasn't, frankly, for small businesses, it wasn't a great program. And what it's driven a lot of small businesses to do, which is unfortunate, but they said, look, we can't wait to get paid back a year and a half from now. Or that's how long it'll take to get this out, under our payroll taxes. This is going to drive us just to lay people off so that we're not subject to this requirement. And if that happens, people did those layoffs before April 1, then that's how that worked out. The second bullet, let's say you took the route of just doing the emergency disaster loan program, you didn't take the advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program, which gives you that loan forgiveness, which is again that great program. If you don't do that, there still is an ability to get some tax credits that cover up to $5,000 per employee for the year. Basically a credit back. And again, this one, you take it out of your payroll taxes. So you need to work with your accountant or your bookkeeper or your payroll service to make sure you're able to make that happen if you go this route. If you don't do the PPP. Now, it doesn't work out, I'm sorry, I left out an important condition. That's only applicable, though, this benefit, if you've had to shut down in part, maybe not entirely or maybe not for the entire 3 or 4 months. But for some period of time you haven't been able to operate, then you can take advantage of this, subject to some limitations. You take advantage of this program as well.
And so from a practical matter here, this is not something that is going to just be done. This isn't an automatic thing that the government is going to take care of for you. If you want to take advantage of either of these things, you have to, whomever does your payroll has to know how to take advantage of it. So
Yeah.
this isn't something you can just assume that it's going to happen. This is something that you have to take an active step to do.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Again, this is just another opportunity if you don't take advantage of the other things, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And basically what this is another effectively kind of a loan. It's the government saying you don't have to pay, a portion of your payroll taxes. You can just, as opposed to like every month you take out the payroll taxes, you send that to the government. Well, for the next little while, you can just hold on to those. You don't have to send them to the government. You still have to pay them. So it's basically a loan, but you don't have to pay them until towards the end of the year and into next year.
So that's a big point here, folks. That is a deferral program, not a forgiveness program.
Yeah. The PPP is still generally going to be a better approach for most businesses, but if you don't take that for whatever reason, then these are some nice alternatives.
Okay. A couple of other items here that are in the bill that just may be applicable to some of you. If you need to withdraw from your 401k up to 100 grand, then you can do so without penalty right now, but only under the conditions that they specify. So just know that those are all things that can be done, but make sure you know and understand the rules under which, and I think your advisor will be able to best direct you there. And then for some of you, you may have student loans out there yet. This is a good opportunity for you to be able to defer those if you need to as well. Okay. So this is not going to be the fun part of this. So if you labored through this last part with us, thank you so much. This next part is not going to be a lot of fun. So I just want to give you a forewarning, but also with the caveat that we simply don't know. This is a very unprecedented time, and there is no historical reference that truly applies. I do want to give you an idea, however, of what economists are saying today could be the result of what it is that we're going through right now. So first of all, these four major things are important to recognize. That there already are supply chain disruptions, and that is a direct effect that's going to have an effect or could have an effect on every single healthcare and secondary healthcare institution that uses PPEs. It's simply a reality. And then we have a global element, and it's going to affect your communities, and it's going to affect every community at a different rate, but people will have lost time from being sick. You don't get a population that goes through illness without affecting the economy. This one, believe it or not, with all of the attention that it's received, as far as the number of people per capita who live in an area versus the number of people who are sick in an area, are very, very different numbers. It's still a very, 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 very low percentage. However, there is lost time. Now, with that lost time, it's not coming from people who are necessarily sick. It's coming from people who are not able to work because of the restrictions that have been placed upon them. And you and I are in that very circumstance right now. And then you have the income limitations and lost profit. You're losing profit. Other companies around you are losing profit. There is a great deal of profit loss, and there are certain sectors which are hit more heavily than other sectors, but everybody is being hit in some way, shape, or form. You see the graph on the GDP. The GDP, the gross domestic product, is really one of the things that drives, quote unquote, the economy. So realize that recessions are driven by certain factors. The GDP is one of those. The bond market is another one of those. So what economists are telling us now is, worst case scenario, we're going to drop into a recession that's going to last for a year or two. Best case scenario, there's going to be a recession that's going to last up to about 6 months. Here's where the big we don't know comes in, because again, this is an unprecedented time. Never has there been such significant economic loss. It's all over the news today, especially. It was forecasted yesterday that first quarter 2020, absolutely devastating across pretty much every industry. But what does that really mean in light of a $2 trillion stimulus package? Nobody knows, because it's never been done before. So understand that these are the best guesses that people have, but we don't really know. I do want to take you back in time, however. Now, I'm using orthodontics here for two reasons. One is I work with a lot of orthodontists. Second is because it is representative of elective procedures. For those of you who are dentists, you know that your elective procedures generally, or anything that falls into the category of elective procedures, are generally what make up your profit margins. So when you think about, not that it can't be done with bread and butter dentistry, I'm just saying, if we look at a figure that we can point to say, what is it that we can forecast with, we see that orthodontists saw an 8% decline in 2008 after a 12% decline that happened in 2007. So a 20% decline in elective procedure over a 2-year period of time, immediately following a significant recession. That's the point I want you to understand. Also, the converse of that is a 10 to 12% drop in revenue. That's overall revenue. Just be aware that that's one of the indications, or one of the things that I believe you're going to, unfortunately, end up having to deal with here. And then we say, okay, well, when did we actually recover from that? So if we look at the date and see that the recovery actually happened in 2012, that's when we saw the bounce back, looking at a 20% increase. So now we're making up, some 4 years later, we're making up for the loss that happened in 2007, 2008. That's a big deal. So what does that mean in practical terms for your practice? Who knows? We don't know what that means. What I will caution, what I've cautioned my clients on, and what I will caution all of you on, is that when you come back, there is right now, this huge pent-up demand. In other words, you had a number of people on your schedule. Now, this has never happened before. You've never had to shut down before, not in this manner. So you have this huge pent-up demand of people that were on your schedule who want to be seen, which means that when you're able to open up your doors again and see all, not just emergency, but all patients, there's going to be this pent-up demand that's going to look like you're going to come back really strong. So in the beginning, my fear is there's going to be this huge uptick in the numbers. And we're going to look at that and say, oh, you're doing great, you're doing great, you're doing great. The reason I'm sharing this information with you is because reality is likely not going to kick in until after that pent-up demand has been satisfied. Remembering the factors that we talked about earlier, a number of people have been laid off. Now, if their employers take advantage of some of the stimulus things, then being laid off could mean that they continue to employ them, including benefits, through that period of time. That's great, but if you get through that 8-week period of time and then they get laid off, their benefits go with them. And so if they have preventive dental benefits, those go bye-bye. Or if they continue to keep them laid off, like I've heard many of you are doing, because your employees could likely make more by being laid off than if you bring them back. And so you believe that you're doing them a favor by keeping them laid off rather than employing them under the payroll protection program. While that on the surface may appear to be the way to go, there's an adverse effect to that as well. And so where those benefits are not actively out in the market and where people are not being paid out in the market, what happens is we hold on to cash. And when people hold on to cash, the statistics that I just gave you are what happened. The recovery from the crash in 2007, 2008 happened more quickly than we saw the comeback within the industry for elective procedures. So just be aware that that is on the forefront. And not only does it have implications to what you're going to do right after you get back to work, I would suggest that it's going to have implications to what you do in the interim, because you're going to need to be, most likely, you're going to need to be fully staffed when you first get back. Okay, so that 8-week period of time, you have to judge that 8-week period of time carefully, because you're going to have all of this pent up demand that you're going to want to satisfy right away. And so boom, spike up, but then it's what's going to happen after that that you want to be very cautious of. And I would encourage you to be, again, extremely transparent with your team, helping them to understand that nobody knows how this is going to work out. They may, come back for a time, but you'll have to evaluate it ongoing as you begin to see what's happening with trends. In the orthodontic world, you're looking at what's going to happen with new patient consults and how many people are going to want to have new patient consults or converting from new patient consults into actual starts. In the dental world, how many people are actually accepting treatment, or are they taking the least restrictive path to treatment from the pocketbook standpoint, which means, okay, yeah, I get it, I should do a crown and a root canal, but nah, let's just pull it because it's cheaper for me to do that. So you're going to be able to see it reflected in behavioral patterns. Those behavioral patterns will not reflect accurately in your numbers for several months following this thing. The other factor is largely being predicted is that there will be an increased sensitivity to social distancing. So in other words, when you're allowed to open your doors again, you may want to not open all of your chairs simultaneously when you open up your doors, and provide for some at least protective social distancing in your practice, kind of gradually ease back into that and kind of triage your folks along the way. So I'm not going to go into the details on any of this, but this is what I am recommending. Stay optimistic, continue to market, because marketing does continue to work. It's continuing to work today. See people in reduced numbers, and even when you come back, do virtual consults where you possibly can. For those of you who are dentists, if you don't know about D9995 and D9996, please become acquainted with those. Go onto the ADA website, download their cheat sheets on those things. One of the benefits, one of the benefits, huge benefits, is that insurance companies have been forced to look at those factors and what they're going to do about them. And that is becoming more and more prevalent. So please take a look at those things. Fill your future schedules. So in other words, pick a date in the future and start to fill them. But as I suggested, maybe fill them cautiously along the way. And then a good time for you to look at what are we doing marketing wise and what should and can we be doing. So with all of that, I'm just going to say, take action. Don't sit still. Do something. Be on the forefront. Don't sit back and just wait to see what's going to happen. Take action now. If you have questions, this is the right time to ask. So if you want to unmute and ask your question, please do so. Or if you want to put it in the chat, you can put it there, and I'll be happy to watch that and respond as well. Again, please take action. Don't just sit still. If you have a question for Troy, please ask. If you have a question for me, please ask. If we don't know the answer, we'll find it and make sure you get that. So what questions do you have?
Could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, I looked at the short application and it asks for 1 month's payroll, but it doesn't make any allowance for the additional possibly covered expenses such as rent and utilities.
Yeah, great observation. The calculation is 2.5 times, and the period that it's applied to is meant to be an 8-week period. And I believe the intent, and Troy, you can correct me, but I believe the intent here is that 1/2 time is considered to be perhaps appropriate to cover those additional elements.
Oh, are you permitted to consider rent if you own the property? Rent to yourself?
Troy, if you'll kick in here, but I believe that is an established patterned type of thing. So if you had established previously that you had been paying rent, even if you're the owner, then you can count that. If it's not previously been established, I think it's kind of a gray area.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's exactly right. And if it's a remember, mortgage interest is also included, so you can't do both, obviously. So, but if you own it, I assume you own it in a different legal entity, or maybe you own the land, the building personally and rent it to your practice. As long as it's arm's length, market rates, I think you'll be fine.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
If your payroll is let's say 100,000 a month, and you're 2.5 times that, so that would be 250,000 that you would put down in terms of on the sheet. What if the doctor out of that is 200,000? So if it's capped at 100, what do you do with the other 100? Do you just take it away and subtract that from that total amount?
Because if it's already established that you're paying rent, it's okay.
Okay, I'm gonna
All right, so very good.
if you would keep your mics muted unless you're asking a question, I would appreciate it so that we can make
All
sure
right, Dad. First,
here's
you have to go to the bathroom.
what's up there, and I'm going to take a quick look here and see if I can
And then we'll do your injection. Well,
I can mute appropriately. So I apologize here.
Someone's practicing dentistry as we're talking. That's awesome.
Gotta love it. You absolutely gotta love it. So reality here, going back to the question that was just asked. Again, remembering that 100,000 is a per annum number, not within that 8-week period of time. And so if you have an established, if you as a doctor have an established process of getting $100,000 salary, or let's say if $100,000 salary per month, then you're okay with that. But remember, it's going to max out per individual. So if you have enough, I'm doing this on a practical sense, if you have enough production value to be at that level of monthly salary, then there's no way your calculation is going to come up to only $250,000. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, it's the $100,000 cap per annum. So, so I think that as Travis said, if the dentist is sort of, I forget what the example was, but 100 of the 250, or sorry, it was 200 of the 100 of, the 250. I think you're going to have to cut back a lot of that and just, assume the dentist is only making, 100,000 divided by 12 in that month as part of your calculation.
Troy, a question on PTO, paid time off. If somebody's already laid off employees and they want to just go ahead and give them their earned PTO, can that be included in the forgiveness component?
Oh, that's a great question. So during that 8 weeks, if they use that to pay, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so we'll look for that answer, but great question.
Yeah.
Another person has asked, do we recommend that doctors go on unemployment?
I mean, obviously it depends on the facts and circumstances, but weigh that against, if you think that your practice is not coming back in 3 months, then that's probably a pretty good option. If you think all you need is a couple of months of loan that will be forgiven to get you through a critical time, then obviously you probably don't want to go on unemployment. You'd want to, use that loan, which you can keep yourself employed and have that be forgiven, and be able to avoid the lesser problem, in all likelihood, lesser amount of compensation you get in unemployment and the administrative hassle of doing that during that period.
Okay. Another question, and again, we may not know the answer to this question, but because this is more employment related question, but if people have already filed for unemployment, they're already receiving unemployment, and then because of the PPP, we bring them back. Again, you're going to, or each person who takes this loan is going to determine that 8-week period of time. And so if you want to shift that 8-week period of time so that, for example, if you can see my hands, you laid them off here, you bring them back here, and your 8 weeks starts here and moves forward 8 weeks, then they're legitimately accepting unemployment for the time in which they were furloughed or laid off. However, if you are saying that your 8-week period of time goes back and predates the time that you bring them back, then there could be a sticking point there.
Yeah, that's right. The whole thing is meant to incentivize people to bring back people as soon as possible. So even though the second condition is at least bring them back by the end of June, in order to get to meet that second condition, the first condition sort of, in order to be able to show that you've spent on appropriate things, in most cases, you're going to probably need enough of a payroll to get you to satisfy that first condition. So it's part of the incentive to bring people back as soon as you can. Now, you may not need it. You've got an expensive, lease for your practice, or otherwise you've got, just enough under the appropriate expenditures to cover it, then you wouldn't need to. But generally, that's the idea, is try to incentivize people to bring back people sooner rather than later.
Okay. Another great question. And I think we addressed this a little bit earlier. Let's recover it again. If somebody leases, they own the building, they're leasing the building to themselves. Does that count as rent? And again, my previous response was that if you have an established procedure of doing that, then I think you're okay. If you're going to kick that in now, I think you may be in a gray area.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But if you do need to kick it in now for let's say it's just, you just barely bought the building, you bought it in another legal entity that you own with your spouse or your dad or something like that, and so you're in a real situation, then I think if it's on arm's length terms, you're going to be okay. But obviously, if you're doing it just as a way to jack up your expenses to get around the system, then
Don't lease your space for $10,000 a month when you're in a $2,000 a month district.
Exactly.
Okay. Again, other questions, please unmute your mic. Go ahead and feel free to ask. We've got great questions so far, so please continue that process.
Sorry, I was hoping I think you clarified this, but I wanted to just get further clarification. Does the 8 weeks start the moment that the money is transferred into your account?
Great question.
Yeah, it is a great one, because the rules say you can sort of, you have the flexibility to have that eight week period count, up, I forget what the dates are, they're earlier in the presentation, but between that kind of February and June timeframe, you can pick your 8 weeks. The application, though, makes it sound like it's going to start from the time you receive the loan. So I think, though, that you'll have the flexibility to show from the date that your loan until the end of that June period, somewhere in there, that there's an 8 week period where you spent the right amount. That should be the right answer. Again, the actual form of application implies something else, but I think you'll have the flexibility that the legislation says you do.
And the reality in these situations is that we've got people putting this stuff together under really tight timelines, and these conditional types of things are going to come up And I think that people will be more than willing to work through some of these issues. So again, I think the best advice in any of these is just be transparent, and I think they'll work with you. Okay, other questions? Great questions. I've got some more that I'll share that have come in written as well, but please ask the questions. Okay, so I'm going to bring this one in. Prior to COVID, if I'm taking this question correctly, prior to COVID and the shutdowns, this particular doctor left their DSO, looking to strike out on their own. Now they're kind of nervous about buying into a practice. What advice would you give somebody looking to buy in the next 4 to 6 months? So I'll stab this first, and I'll give you, Troy, some time to think about it. Okay. My stab at this would be, I think this, depending on, of course, the situation and the price, but this would be a great time to buy if you're buying the right condition and you're buying at the right price. And if you're talking about an orthodontic practice here, which I'm assuming, yeah, he specifically said that. So if you're talking about an orthodontic practice, absolutely, especially if what you're buying is the outstanding receivables. So watch those numbers very, very carefully. Now, if the seller is saying, no, I want the outstanding receivables and all you're going to get is a new business, then make sure you get it at the right price. And that negotiation ability just dropped significantly on the seller's end. So not tying those things up prior to February 15th is going to cost them a bunch of money. But if you happen to be on the buyer end, I can tell you right now, DSOs are in grab mode. If they've got active cash flow, they are absolutely looking for opportunities right now. So this is a good buying time if you have that. But again, please, please, please work with somebody. Doesn't have to be me or Troy, but I think those are good options. But work with somebody to look at those numbers who can really advise you well going into that negotiation. Troy?
No, I think you said it right. I mean, this is these time frames where the economy goes into a cycle and into the downward part of a cycle. Those are great buying opportunities. Not just because prices come down, but also the competition oftentimes goes away. The DSOs will get nervous because they're private equity funded and they're not sure themselves. And so the competition kind of dries up a little bit as well. So it can be a great time to buy. But one other thing I just say is, and my advice would tend to be more legal and operational than it is financial. I'll leave that to Travis and those who, and financial advisors. But on the operational front, definitely worry if the practice isn't going to be operating for 4 to 6 months. What are you going to have to rebuild at the end of that? Are you going to have to go out and hire employees? Are you going to have to, sort of put the pieces back together? If there's too much of that, if the seller can't sort of assure you that the people that have helped put, the employees and the patients and the building and everything that has gotten that practice to where it is, that the marketing, they can't sort of keep that alive and available for you in the 4 to 6 months, then in some ways you're like, well, why is it better to buy a practice than just to go start my own? Because if it all falls apart, I'm buying something I've got to put back together anyway. So those are a lot of different things to think about, but I think it is an interesting time and potentially a very opportunistic time.
Great point. I will say this, in addition to that, is that there are already significant signs in the market that investment dollars, like angel investment dollars, are drying up rapidly. People are just recoiling because they just don't know, and that's one of the drivers of the market is uncertainty, and that is what's going on right now. So just be aware of that. Okay. If you've already filed for unemployment for yourself, again, as a team member or a doctor, those are irrelevant. But whenever you start the PPE process, if you're going to apply the PPE process, unemployment and the PPE reimbursement for employment cannot overlap. Okay, that's the key point there.
So, Travis,
Yeah,
may I ask you?
yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hi,
Okay.
Travis. My name is Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
I'm an orthodontist in Midtown Manhattan, and
Oh, bless your
today
heart.
our periodontist and two general dentists that we work with made an announcement that said they're not reopening till right after Labor Day. So what I did was I put my team on furlough. I am an employee of my own company, so I applied for unemployment also. Now, my accountant said that possibly our bank is going to have a portal this Friday, and we should apply for the PPP process as soon as we can while they still have money. I guess my question is, should I apply on Friday? Should I put it off? I'm not really sure. I do want my team to get the unemployment because we're so in the gray as far as when we could reopen. Yet I'd like the PPP loan to be able to, I guess, maintain my current practice too.
Sure.
What do you recommend when to apply?
Jackie, great question. There's a difference between when to apply and when the rules apply. And Troy, help me out here, but Jackie, even if you don't reopen before June 30th, if you have an 8-week period of time where you've maintained payroll over that time, then the forgiveness element of the PPP is still in place. It has nothing to do with the operational status of the practice. It has to do with your behavior surrounding employment.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you're keeping people on, then you know, and you meet those expenditure requirements, then you can be forgiven. Another, you know, given the advice that you got to get the money while it's there, that's also good advice. You could take the position that, well, I'm not really sure whether I'll be operating or not, but I could still take the loan. It'll be a low interest loan, and at least I'll have that liquidity. Even if it's not forgiven, I'll still have the liquidity. No personal guarantee on it, and so I think that's another thought you could take, and maybe useful approach.
Yeah, and Jackie, I would also add there that while unemployment may be a good Band-Aid, it will do nothing to maintain the operations of your practice. So your lease and the other things that you have going there. Again, that peace of mind of having that liquidity, I think, is of value.
Okay, so I can still maintain and decide at a later date what 8 weeks I would like to maintain that loan, even if it's not forgiven, and still have my staff on unemployment, correct?
The advisory and the regulation, that is the interpretation. The strict language on the application sounds a little bit different than that, but that shouldn't hinder your application process. And those types of rules differences will become clear as each day goes on.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Jackie, for being with us. Benefits. Would benefits apply in the 2.5 average? Yes, absolutely. Include whatever benefits that you have been paying. Those go into the calculations of what your average payroll is in that period. So yes, benefits, pension, medical expenses, somewhat questionable there, Troy. Medical expenses versus medical insurance. I do know, because I know I have some of my doctors that will pay a medical stipend. So they don't necessarily pay for health insurance, but they do give their employees a stipend, again, on an established regular basis. That would apply?
Well, that would certainly apply because it's just a payment. I mean, it's a payment of cash, and so you can call it whatever you want, but it's still basically, payroll. So that would count. I'm not, if the question is whether if there's a major medical expenditure for like the owner employee, I don't think you could count that. But for everything else that you just described, Travis, I think you're good to go.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful. All right, other questions, folks, that you have? Few more seconds. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say thank you very, very much. I do appreciate you being here. Troy, very much appreciate you being here and the expertise that you've lended. Again, folks, take action. Don't sit idle on this process. And the other thing that I would say is, you know what, we will get through this. We will come out on the other side, and those who are active will come out ahead. This has been recorded, so each of you will get an email so you can go see the recording someplace if that's what you wish to do. There's a lot of information that's been shared here. So again, thank you so much for being with us. I do very much appreciate it. I wish you all the very, very best. A difficult, trying time. I do realize that, and we are all working to navigate that together. And if there's anything we can do for you, anything I can do for you, or Troy can do for you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you have additional questions, we'll do our best to answer them. You can reach out to me via email. If you want to have a phone call, I'll just send you that number, and let's get started. All right. Thank you again so much. Y'all take care.